First off, thank you all so much for being here, and congrats on such an incredible film. Also, we wanted to give a shout out to Mojan Aria, who plays Farhad. He's somewhere in the audience. Woo! Congrats as well. So my first question is for you, Noora. As you mentioned earlier, this is a very personal film. Can you talk about the genesis of crafting your story into a narrative feature?
Absolutely. So it was around 6 years ago that I decided to take on this project, and it wasn't without the permission of my mom. I needed her both in terms of her support, but also her collaboration, because I was telling our story, and because my memories were so fractured from that time as a 5-year-old, I asked her to write a memoir to fill in the gaps of my memories, and so she did for 6 months. She was working on it, and I was guiding her through the process, and it was very cathartic. We cried a lot, we talked a lot, there was a lot of discoveries, and it ended up being 50,000 words, and I took that, and that was sort of the source material for the first draft. But over the course of the 3 years that I wrote the screenplay, it really kind of took its own life, finding the cinematic potential of the story beyond our experience.
And because it is your own life, I'm sure there was things from your story that you weren't able to include. So was there anything that didn't make it into the script or the final edit that you'd like to share?
I have a brother, and he's not in this film, obviously. And, it's really tough juggling, child actors, and I wanted to really ground the film in the feminine story, the mother-daughter story, so he's okay with it. He still feels very seen by the film, because obviously we had, that experience together, but yeah, he had a very emotional reaction to the film, but yeah, he's really proud.
It's his story too. And I'm curious what the overall timeline was for the film, and how did everyone here get involved? And at what point did you get involved?
Timeline. Yeah, so 6 years ago when we started the memoir, and Vincent got involved at the end of 2018, or end of 2017. But I'm happy to pass down the mic.
Thanks, guys. But when you came to me and you didn't have a script, you had a treatment, and you didn't so much pitch me the whole story, but describe that situation in the women's shelter, and that's what resonated with me. I hadn't seen that on screen before, and it was just a very particular world that I thought is happening out there, but we don't know about it, and I didn't know about it. It was an very Australian scene, but it was part of Australia I hadn't seen before. So I just said, how can I help you tell this story? And that's how it started. Or that part of it, anyway.
We're in kind of the right order in some ways. Yeah. So me and Kate Blanchett and Andrew Upton, we're all partners in Dirty Films, and Kate and Andrew are also Australian. So this came to us through Vincent, and not only were we blown away by Noora's shorts, but we were particularly interested in stories of immigration and displacement. So we were looking at it through that lens as like a really unique way to approach that story. And obviously with the mother-daughter relationship at the core. And we just were incredibly moved and jumped right in to executive produce, and luckily, we got the 51 fund coming in shortly after that, and I'll let Lindsay speak to that.
Oh, right. So I think it came to us through UTA originally, but it was some convincing for us because we were looking for more commercial fare, but female-led, but the agent convinced us, your wonderful agent, Jess, she convinced us that we had to read it. So now that you've all seen it, I can talk about the rice cooker scene we all cried when we read that scene in particular, and we don't tend to agree on films that easily. So, and then we met with Coco and Vincent and Noora and talked about the film, and then we joined it, what year is that? 2022, early 2022, and it went into production that year in the summer. And I'm not sure when Elika came on. Oh, you have one. Great.
Yeah, I got to know Noora through a mutual friend that we had, and that was the only thing about him, good thing about him, knowing Noora, honestly. But yeah, I read the script. We talked over the phone. We connected right away. And I joke about stuff. I'm trying to be funny most of the time. I think I am, but I read the script, and then I had my notes. I was really, blunt and direct about everything. She liked it, and we talked about this story, and I loved it, and I wanted to be on board. And we connected. We talked for about a year about the story, and yeah, that's how I got on board on this project. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I love that the film is set in the fall during the new year when normally it takes place in the springtime. It's such a meaningful choice that you make in the film. Can you talk about the symbolism and intention behind that choice?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you guys are lucky in the Northern Hemisphere to have Nowruz as it's intended during the springtime. But in Australia, I only ever experienced it in the fall, when the leaves are falling, when the trees are bare, and so that's all. That's the only Nowruz that we ever knew, because I didn't go back to Iran until I was like 19 years old, and I just found the juxtaposition of that always really fascinating, because Nowruz is all about new beginnings and new life, and but for me it was like a shedding, a letting go, which is what there's some dialogue about that, and so the symbolism, it's obviously relating to Shayda's journey as well. It's like she's letting go of her past and at the same time finding a new beginning. So yeah, it was really important to the imagery of the film to set it at that time.
And then we get the fall fashion from it as well. And in reference for both Elika and Noora, in reference to the structure of the film, the narrative taking place over a year and coming full circle back to Nowruz, was this always the plan, or did it evolve in the edit?
I think it was the plan.
It was in the script.
Yeah, it was in the script. Yeah. It was there from the beginning. Yeah.
Can you talk more about editing process?
The editing process, it was hard. It was sweet. It was dark. It was intense. All of those, because it's a personal experience, and very traumatic. And I wasn't. It was my first time doing a real story, based on a true event. So I learned a lot through the process. Working with Vincent, Noora, everybody in a Castlemaine, in a village
in Australia,
dealing with lots of insects. Crazy spiders, and it was definitely a learning process for me, for sure, and getting to know Noora through the process, and collaborating with her. She's smart, she knows what she wants, and we had the script. We followed the script pretty much from the beginning, and Coco gave us a brilliant note. Midway, and changed a couple of the really bullet points, and it was great. We talked a lot through the process.
We laughed a lot.
And we
cried a lot.
Yeah, we cried a lot. And one of the ways, I guess, to overcome the trauma and the darkness is to facing it. So I guess that was our way.
Yeah, we shared a lot of stories in that edit room.
We got naked in the editing room, like our soul, not literally, but
Yeah, it seems like it was a very cathartic process for everyone.
It was,
yeah.
And
metaphorically naked.
Yeah, metaphorically. The relationship between Shayda and Mona is so special and sweet, and Selena, the actress who plays Mona, she's absolutely incredible. How did you cultivate that connection between them on and off screen, and how did you find Selena? Did she need much coaching?
Wow, I was so lucky to meet Selena. She was one of the shortlisted girls from Melbourne. We had around 100 tapes from little Farsi-speaking girls all over Australia, which were adorable. But yeah, as soon as she walked into the audition, she had this spring in her step, this confidence, and I gave her a situation and she cried. And it wasn't because I prompted her, it's just how she responded to the moment. And then 10 minutes later, she was able to dance. And so she understood acting. You know, she had an emotional intelligence beyond her years. She was only 6 years old. And so for me, the most important thing was like protecting her from the themes of the film. And that's where a lot of the coaching and rehearsals took place in terms of finding situations to give her that were substitute, that were child-friendly situations, so that when we were on set, it was like a shorthand that she understood. And yeah, we spent around 2 months doing that. And I also got her to send Zar videos and drawings from Australia to Paris, and Zar would respond. And so they had a little long-distance relationship before Zar got to Australia. So by the time they met, they like fell in love. Like they were so bonded already. And yeah, I think they both came to it with an open-heartedness, and they just hit it off. Like they were always playful, and they were mother and daughter when they weren't mother and daughter, if that makes sense. It was just such a beautiful connection that they had. And for me, it was really about letting it play out. You know, if they were doing something that wasn't, when we weren't rolling, you know, I would try and capture that somehow, whether it was in the next scene or just in that very moment. So it was really about embracing what they were giving us. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
And does Selena plan on still acting in the future, do you know?
Yes, she wanted to be here for AFI, but because of the actors' strike and Zara couldn't be here, so hopefully we'll be back in January. She's very ready for LA. She's got her outfits picked out. No, she loves acting. She's looking for an agent. So, yeah, she's a star. She's born for this, but, we have to also protect her from the whole thing.
And I do want to open it up to the audience, but you talking about clothes makes me want to talk about clothes as well. I absolutely love the 90s style and the music in the film. And for SHAYDA, clothing and cutting her hair becomes a way to express herself and her freedom. Can you speak more about the costume design and the significance of that evolution in her style?
Absolutely. Yeah, with my costume designer, Zoe Castellano, it was so much about SHAYDA's emotional journey, expressing that through the costume. And in terms of the actual costume journey, it was about her being confident to express her female form, on her terms. That doesn't necessarily mean showing more skin, but like her figure and, being emboldened by that. So much of the silhouettes of the costume evolved through the course of the film. And also colour, it was very much about her embracing life, embracing freedom, and that shows up in the colours and the patterns and the textures that we had her wear. It was almost like, becoming a butterfly, by the end, in terms of how she's expressing herself. And every single character had that kind of journey. For Hossein, it was like an unraveling, and for the Farhad character, it was an unburdened costume. It was, coming from the West and having a freedom about him and the way he moves and everything. And he did such a beautiful job. I wish he could talk about it. But so costume is so fundamental to storytelling, and especially for the 90s. There's so much character, so much texture, and I really wanted to honour also the cultural aspects of the community at the time and the differences there as well.
Yeah, there's so much life and personality in her outfits. I'm wondering if you have any questions out there. Yes, and I'm going to repeat the question, by the way, just because we're filming.
Can you talk more about the cultural aspects of the film, because it's very rich in the music, in the dances, in the video, and it doesn't make us feel like we are in Australia. It makes us feel like we are in some other country. And I want to congratulate you, because it's very difficult for a Hollywood director to achieve that you have done in your first film. Congratulations.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
Cultural aspects of the film.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I wanted SHAYDA to reclaim her cultural identity, and so much of that is through dance, through poetry, through the food. You know, for Iranians, I know there's a lot of Iranians here, but it's like no matter the dark situation that we're in, we always come back to the light. We come back to the poetry, the music, the dance. You know, it's kind of therapy for us. And I really wanted to capture that in this film because despite the fact that they're in a difficult, you know, situation, escaping domestic violence, there's hope as well. And I think a lot of that hope comes from the celebration of culture and, you know, and her being able to step into her own and choose the things that, you know, empower her and her daughter to start a new life. And so that's why the cultural elements were so important. And it's also how I grew up. You know, I was in the Australian suburbs, but I was in a little house of Iran with my mum. You know, she would do all those things, you know, translate music for me, poetry, teach me how to dance with the VHS videos. And so much of it is lived experience, but also, you know, a collective experience. Do you want to speak to the cultural aspects?
You said it all.
I said it all.
Yeah.
Very well. Any other questions out there? Yes?
Hi.
I just love the visual style, how they're like so deep in SHAYDA's perspective, and I was just thinking like you could speak more to that and the choices that you made visually and translating that into the turmoil that she's going through.
The visual style and translating her inner turmoil.
Yeah, I mean, my cinematographer and I, we'd worked together on 3 short films, and you know, we had a shorthand, and we had a lot of talks around how do we get inside her head? How do we express the intensity and emotionality of this experience? And so for us, it was about the proximity to SHAYDA and Mona, to being always in their, either in their point of view or alongside them. So we're never in Hussein's point of view, we're never like in an objective point of view, we're always with them. And the 4:3 aspect ratio also helps kind of immerse the audience into that, I hope, into that experience. And also just the claustrophobic nature of, you know, her situation. Like she's in limbo, she doesn't know, they don't know when they're going to get out of this place and you know, free of this violence. So, you know, the constrained aspect ratio, the proximity, also the lighting choices, you know, limiting a lot of things. And as the film progresses, there's an opening up of both the frame and also of the daylight. And yeah, so it was a real progression of the story in terms of the cinematography.
Yes? Oh, and then you.
Yeah. First, congratulations on this beautiful movie. So I just wanted to ask you about your journey of becoming the filmmaker. You mentioned like the catharsis part of the storytelling. Could you tell me about like was telling this story really drove you to become a filmmaker? Can you talk about that a little?
Your journey as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I actually started in architecture school when I was 17 and then transitioned to filmmaking when I was 19. So, and I've made short films and documentaries for about 12 years before embarking on SHAYDA. And yeah, I mean, I always knew that I would make this film, whether it was my first film or my third film. It was just one of those stories that I knew I had to be the one to tell it. And I'm kind of relieved that it's done, in a sense, because it was very challenging emotionally, psychologically, all of those things. And I do feel quite unburdened, like being able to share the film with audiences around the world, having people tell me their stories, feeling connected to people through our story. It just shows how universal, you know, the film is, and that's the cathartic part for me, is like realizing how universal it is, and it's not just our story, you know, it's everyone's story, and it's been the most beautiful part of the journey. So thank you. Thank you.
We had a question in the back.
Oh,
First of all, the acting was wonderful, and the girl playing Mona was amazing. I wanted to ask about the last scene, a couple of questions. First of all, the girl really did look older, and I wondered how much time had passed between the previous scene and that last scene in terms, both of the filmic terms, but also in actual time. And then the other question is the implication that the father was the one that set the fire and that's why he's in prison?
So, a question about the young actress, how long they filmed, and then did the Hossein set the fire?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of movie magic with Mona looking older. I think it's costume, hair and makeup, and we did shoot it toward the end of the schedule, which helps. You know, kids are growing so quickly these days. And yeah, and I think, to be honest, I think there was a maturity about her by the end of the shoot that also it's about her presence as well. But no, we didn't wait like 2 years to shoot it or anything. It was, yeah. Yeah. And, you know, in terms of that implication, I think, you know, I wanted to leave it up to the audience to make that decision because it really could be, you know, any of those men, any of the partners of those women. I mean, that's the reality of these situations in women's shelters. So, you know, there's different reasons why he could be in jail. But I wanted to leave that open. I didn't want it to be a definitive thing. But thank you for your question.
Speaking of the women's shelter, can you talk about like those characters that, you know, are the support system for her and crafting a sisterhood between her, them, and SHAYDA?
Absolutely. So the woman whose character Joyce is based off of, she's like a godmother to me. She became my mom's best friend after the shelter, and I had many hours of conversations with her while I was writing the screenplay. And some of her stories of being a shelter manager for 30 years fed into my writing process. And every single one of those characters in the shelter is inspired by a real woman that either she encountered or my mother encountered. And the diversity of the women was important to capture because that's the reality of domestic violence. You know, it doesn't discriminate. It's women from all different walks of life, all different cultures, all different demographics and economic situations. So I wanted to honor their stories, their individual stories, but really ground them in a place of truth. And it was Deidre's help. She allowed me to, you know, access so much of her experience. So it was a lot of research to write each character. And then it's like each actor bringing their experience. You know, I have to say, I think every single one of the actors who played a woman in that shelter had experienced some kind of, you know, domestic violence or you know, traumatic situation. It's like they could bring so much of their own experience. I mean, that's the sad thing is like how common it is. And it was only in sharing space together, like I let them all inhabit the shelter for a couple of days during rehearsal, and it was all set. They had their clothes in their wardrobe. They could sleep in their beds. We made cakes together. It was in sharing that space lived, you know, it was a lived experience by the time we started filming. So we created a real sisterhood in the house. And that warmth and connection was so fundamental to showing the world of the women's shelter, but also, you know, it's also just a counter to the darkness of the story, the sisterhood and the warmth between them.
Oh yeah, we definitely feel the warmth. And I'm just curious what's next for the film and then what's next for you as a filmmaker.
Thank you. Well, we're Australia's nominee for the International Feature Film category. Thank you. At the Oscars. So we're trying to get as many people to see the film and opt in, and you know, we'd love to make the shortlist and see what happens from there. But we are releasing for a week on the 1st of December in LA and New York. So there'll be a window for family and friends to see it. And then we're having a more nationwide release in January. So that's the SHAYDA journey. We have an Instagram page, SHAYDA Film. You can follow us and see where we go. But Yeah, and what was the second question?
What's next for you?
Oh no, what's next for me? Yeah, I have a second project. It's an adaptation of an Iranian American novel, which I'm working with producer Gary Foster, and we're hoping to shoot next year in France. So that'll be fun.
Yay, exciting. Well, thank you, Noora, so much. Thank you, everyone. Oh.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.